How's Alex doing? Please tell him I said hello.
Hello. He always says hello.
Be a massive full moon this weekend.
Really? Wow.
The beaver moon?
Yes. Yeah.
As opposed to the harvest moon, what's the difference?
I guess the beaver moon is like the moon that, I guess they call it that because beavers use it to make dams for the winter.
It's supposed to be some
It's very big.
Yeah.
It's supposedly very big. Bigger than a harvest moon.
It's been big.
Used to be there were a whole bunch of trees around my in the back of my house where the moon and sun come up, and now thankfully they cut down a lot of the trees, so now I can see the moon.
Nice.
It's because it's kind of low, lower on the horizon. It's not overhead. It's kind of circling low, so now we can see it.
I didn't notice actually last night how bright it was
Yes.
outside. It was incredibly bright for darkness. It was incredibly bright. Yeah.
Usually I can't sleep because of the brightness.
Yeah. It
So
was.
I can tell.
Really keeps you up?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I've become a lunatic, as they say. Yeah. More so than usual.
Sometimes wakes me up too.
What's that?
Maybe that's mom.
Oh, she's coming to the moon. Great. I was going to say, we need some people on this side of the room, I feel.
We're tilting over.
Good morning, Deb. Maybe that's your phone. Where is Becky? Good morning, Mary. Good morning, everyone. This morning's talk is the second of how many talks? What are we talking about? Oh, Awakening to the Force. The second of 4 talks. It's tough when you teach 3 classes and you got series going on in each class. So,
It's the 6th of 3 talks.
yeah, it's one of a series of talks on Awakening to the Four Noble Truths. I believe it's the second. We'll meditate first. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And holding your back straight but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders, your nose aligned with your navel. But holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room, settle onto your seats, settle into your bodies, and settle into your minds. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. To be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 30 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. 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 If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Good morning, Becky. Good to see you.
It's good to be here.
I'll see you Tuesday, my friend. So today is the second of 2 talks of a series of 4 on what it means to awaken to the 4 noble truths in relation to each truth. Let me just cover just touch on what we covered last week. The Buddha describing awakening as it relates to the 4 noble truths, that the noble truth of dukkha as disappointment and suffering has been comprehended. And that means on a very deep and profound level, we've penetrated to an understanding of the nature of suffering and the arising of suffering in the world. The Buddha continues, the noble truth of the origination of dukkha has been abandoned. That means that we have abandoned craving and clinging. The noble truth of the cessation of dukkha has been experienced. So this is taking it out of a conceptual realm to the Buddha pointing out that we actually have the direct experience of that cessation of the suffering. It's not something that we're hoping for or wishing for. It's not something that we think we can gain by acting in a certain way. We do things to have the experience of the cessation of suffering and to have the understanding of that experience. Again, it's not something conceptual. And that the noble truth of the way of practice leading to the cessation of dukkha, of suffering, has been developed. Again, reminding all of us that it's through the Eightfold Path that we develop an awakened, fully mature human mind. I'm skipping through a little bit of the article that's on the website. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha explains the origination of stress and the abandoning of the origination of stress. The origination of stress is craving and grasping born of desire arising from ignorance, not understanding who we are in relation to the world we live in. Desire arising from ignorance, which creates more craving and grasping, leading to passion for the many things of this world. In other words, craving for sensual fulfillment, craving for being, for the establishment of a self in this world, and craving for non-being. So what is that? Well, let me read this. Craving for non-being is craving for the establishment of a self that is substantial and permanent and not subject to the laws of impermanence, suffering, and anatta, meaning impermanence, stress and not self, and karma. And karma is the unfolding of that, and that's experienced by constant rebirth of a moment prone to ignorance. Is that clear? That is attempting to establish something which is deluded and impossible based on an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, meaning continually trying to establish a permanent self in a environment that simply doesn't support it. We're always in a process of change, whether we realize it or not. Continuity often obscures the impermanence of all things. In describing the truth of stress, the first noble truth the Buddha teaches, birth is stressful, meaning simply as a consequence of having a human life, there's going to be stress. We can't escape that. Aging is stressful. Death is stressful. Sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair are all stressful. Association with those loathed, with those undesired, is stressful. And separation from what is loved is stressful. Not getting what is wanted is stressful. And receiving what one desires to avoid is stressful. In short, the 5 clinging aggregates, the personal experience of ongoing suffering, is stressful. My words, we are subject to stress and suffering in all of its forms simply as a consequence of being in this world. The experience of stress is continually reinforced by clinging, grasping, and desire, meaning wanting the people and events of our lives, including ourselves, to be different than they are. And it's really that last that is the ultimate problem to be recognized and abandoned. The stress that we create for ourselves, the Samyutta Sutta speaks to that. It's the taking life personally and reacting to life as life occurs in a personal way that is the ultimate problem, and it's also the ultimate distraction. Most of us spend our lives getting caught up in the game, and it's really portrayed that way, that the game of life is about getting all the things that you can that make you happy and avoiding all the things that you can avoid that make you unhappy. And in the middle, we miss all the things that we're ambiguous to, that we just don't care about because they don't cause a reaction. And it's really in that middle, that the ambiguity that we, that approach that we take to life, that has us missing most of life because we're not reacting to it. It's not giving a rise. We're not seeing it in a personal way. So by taking life personal, we create the ongoing distraction that causes an ongoing underlying experience of stress in all of our lives. It leaves us with an often subtle tension that's always there. It's what leads to what many people describe as a monkey mind. Our minds are always churning. Why are they always churning? How come we can't just naturally decide? Another way of saying it, why don't we have control of our minds? Why can't we naturally just decide, I'm going to have a peaceful mind? Why do we need a practice that an awakened human being had to develop in order to bring that? Because we are so preoccupied with chasing after what gives us pleasure and avoiding anything that would impinge on that, take away from it. And that becomes a constant struggle with life. Is that clear with everyone? And I think you all can relate to it that way, can't you? And I should say, it's not wrong. It's not right. It's not, it doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with us, except our views are wrong. That begins and ends with right view and wrong view. Our views of the world, of ourselves in relation to the world, are rooted in ignorance of these Four Noble Truths. And so that relates directly to awakening to these Four Noble Truths, gaining a profound understanding of the nature of suffering, as we started with. By mindfully understanding that it is ignorance or wrong view of the truth of stress arriving from our own desire, that is the cause of ongoing stress and suffering that we experience. From that understanding, we can then, with right intention and the other supporting factors of the Eightfold Path, simply abandon desire. We don't have to analyze it any further, try to figure out where it came from. We know where it comes from. It doesn't come from an incident that happened during our childhood or during our teenage years or 5 minutes ago. That contributes to it, but it's because of our reaction and the resulting conditioned mind that we carry through our entire lives that is affecting us in this present moment. And simply by recognizing what's occurring, we're able to abandon it. If we get caught up into the wheres and the whys and the hows and who did it, we'll never get there. That's just constant distraction. Abandoning all desire may seem extreme, but abandoning desire in all its forms is what is known as the middle way, meaning this is developed through the Eightfold Path. Abandoning desire is a reasonable approach to life in the phenomenal world. Now remember, it's desire born of ignorance. We're not abandoning anything that is motivating us in any useful and positive way. Is that clear? Because that's where people can get really hung up. Don't I need a certain amount of desire to pursue my dreams? If they're rooted in ignorance, that desire that's motivating you is ultimately going to be a distraction and hinder your performance in chasing after your dreams. An awakened, fully mature human being understands the nature of life in the world, and that there's things that are necessary to do, such as get up in the morning and go to your job so you have food on your table. That's the world we live in, so you can pay the rent, pay the mortgage, take care of your children. That's all something that a mature mind doesn't need any motivation to do. It does it naturally. And even to pursue developing a life based on individual interests is not contrary to this idea. It's simply following it in a meaningful and awakened way, whatever we decide that we want to pursue in life. Of course, as long as it falls within the framework of the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path might guide that decisions to change the course of our life if it's not in agreement with right speech, right action, and certainly right livelihood. But it in no way takes away the inner motivation to live a meaningful life. In practice, it's really the opposite of that. It develops a way of living in the world where moment by moment, as life occurs, every moment is meaningful. We don't have to manufacture something that is rooted in ignorance to create meaning in the world. It simply is because we're mindful of what's occurring. We're fully immersed in the human experience rather than looking for the human experience to be different than what it is. And it's in that needing life to be different that we're really missing out on the meaningfulness of life. Clear?
I have a question.
Please.
In the pursuit of, well, I guess saying the pursuit of happiness, or in the pursuit of more contented life, if you say avoid a noxious person.
Yeah.
Should you avoid the noxious person? I mean, I suppose you can go, there's two ways to do it. You can just, if you come upon them, know they are what they are, listen to what they have to say and move on, or go out of your way not to be exposed to them at all. I'll give an example of watching the news, because someone sometimes on it.
Yeah.
And is it wrong to call out an aversion and go out of your way not to be exposed to it?
Yes and no, and it's a great question. I would say that we can easily, be, not just now, but it seems like it's becoming more, the situation in the world, not just with one person, is getting more and more intense. And so it can lead to more distraction by, we just can't break ourselves away from what's occurring. So the middle way would say, it's important to understand what's going on in the world, but not to the point of distraction or preoccupation. So watch the news a little bit, not a lot. We don't need to have, whatever channel we're watching going on 24/7, or even, find a reasonable balance there. Maybe we watch, when I was growing up, we got our news at 6 o'clock. From 6 to 7, we caught up on the day, and if we wanted to, and that was it. Now, just because it's 24/7, we feel like we have to. We don't. We can get our news in an hour a day or a half hour a day, or maybe 1 hour a week, whatever we decide. To get back to the aversion to a noxious person, if there's a way of avoiding that person, it's simply mindful to avoid people like that. The Buddha talks repeatedly, and I know this goes against kind of the common New Age thing that we're all one people and we should embrace everything. I don't see that. The Buddha teaches that we should see things discreetly and avoid things that are hurtful to us. So people that are naturally noxious people, or obnoxious, is that the right word? Obnoxious.
But also noxious.
It's an aspect of a mature human being to say, I just simply don't want to associate with that person. Throughout the Buddha's teachings, and in many teachings directly, the Buddha talks about how important it is, and I talk about it too, to be mindful of who and what we're associating with. And even in a way of associating with someone who is obnoxious or noxious, it's simply intelligent to not associate with that. Now, I know who you're referring to. There's going to be people in the world that we're going to have to acknowledge, such as world leaders. We're going to have to be exposed to them in some way. Understand the nature of aversion, and understand that even people that have risen to great levels of power, maybe even especially, they're prone to dukkha too, meaning they're prone to acting in a way that is rooted in ignorance of the way things really are. And I can go back to every president that there's been around in my lifetime has acted in those ways at some point. So understanding the nature of dukkha allows us to be in the world, even with very obnoxious people, and not necessarily react to them. But that doesn't mean that we're supposed to be superhuman people and be able to be exposed to this all the time without reacting to it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Sorry if it was a little bit too long-winded, but it's really an important thing, because we can get caught up with almost becoming isolationists, and realize that's not the middle way either. We have to live in the world. We have to learn to live in the world and be at peace with all things, all situations, even people that seem to go out of their way to get other people upset, put it that way, because we understand where it's coming from. And again, just because people are able to put themselves into positions of power or even governance over other people doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, in the way our systems are set up, it most likely doesn't mean that they're awakened or even have a great level of human maturity. And again, I'm not pointing out just one person. Let's look around the world, or let's look throughout our own system. And I'm not putting down our representatives or our senators or anybody in public office. I really believe that most people get into public office, the great majority, because they really want to help people. But because their views are still rooted in wrong views, they often fail at that, don't they? And we tend to blame them more. We tend to put more blame on those people than they deserve often, sometimes not enough, because we don't really understand the nature of that. All of these people that we put in power in our country, through our electoral process, are still governing from a place of dukkha, aren't they? And so, well, where am I going with this? So we need to understand it. It doesn't, and again, now remember, awakening also means that we understand the difference between approval and acceptance. We accept it because it's what's occurring, and it's the most helpful way to be in the world. But we certainly don't have to approve of things that are obviously should not be approved of. But we accept it. And then we can work in the world in a peaceful way. So thank you for the question. Excuse the rather long answer. Well, and this relates exactly to the middle way and what we were just talking about, because an extreme view would be, that's just unacceptable. I need to do something right now, rather than first developing a common peaceful mind through understanding. The Buddha says, these two extremes are to be abandoned: the compulsion to indulge and gain pleasure from objects of sensual desire, meaning all things that we crave that arise from contact with our senses. We had an interesting talk on Tuesday evening that's somewhat related to this. Just because I have a view and I feel that my view is wholesome and altruistic, and it very well may be, how do I not confront these things in the world? How do I sit quietly? The most important thing you can do when you feel reactive towards anything, even if it's coming from what might prove to be an altruistic or compassionate point of view, the best thing to do is to keep your mouth shut and consider what you're saying or what you hope to say, and consider who you're saying it to, and then consider, is it likely to have a beneficial effect, or is it going to fall on deaf ears? And if the conclusion is that no, it likely won't have a beneficial effect and it's likely to fall on deaf ears, the best thing, the skillful thing to do, the thing that's in accordance with the Eightfold Path, is to simply remain silent. That goes against an ego personality, doesn't it? That says, I need to exert myself in the world. I need to let people know how I think and how other people think is wrong.
That's very satisfying.
And again, I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
I said that's very satisfying to tell people
Yes.
thinking that they're wrong.
Initially, but it's also very unsatisfying when they say, you're wrong, isn't it? And where does it lead to? It leads to the
Suffering.
It leads to the suffering. It leads to threats, doesn't it? I'll get you. If you don't stop what you're doing that's getting me upset, I'm going to do something to get you even more upset.
Mm-hmm.
It's the essence of immaturity, isn't it? Yet, and again, this isn't a comment, this is how the world is being governed right now, in a way. I'll show you. I mean, I remember when my mom slapped my hand going into the cookie jar. And those are the exact things I said to her. I'll show you. I'll get back to you. I'm going to hold my breath till I die. And yet and again, I'm not pointing out to one person. Everybody, it seems like all our leaders are holding their breath. Rather than holding their tongue. I think if there was one great improvement in the world, and again, not a comment on one person, it certainly isn't. If they would just learn to shut up a little bit, just hold your tongue. Just consider what you're saying and consider your position. The world would be an instantly better place. So how do we begin to affect that change in the world? The only way we can do it is with ourselves. The Buddha taught this to all of us 2,600 years ago. And if I can get off my soapbox, maybe we can get to it. I have to go back just to keep it in context. These two extremes are to be abandoned. The compulsion to indulge and gain pleasure from objects of sensual desire, that are all things that we crave that arise from contact with our senses, the Buddha's words, which is inferior, low, vulgar, ignoble, and leads to more delusion and compulsion to indulge in self-torment, which is painful, ignoble, and leads to more delusion. Doesn't that describe what happens when we start talking and acting in a way that is aggressive towards what's occurring in the world? It simply creates more upset in ourselves. It's ignoble. And again, I'm talking about all of us, the common human problem of wrong speech, wrong action, and wrong livelihood. In our modern world, we fail to see that extreme view and extreme behavior is constantly seeking sensual fulfillment as if it's a divine right or an expression of ultimate freedom. We're taught, it's almost a, I don't even know what the right word is, an underlying habit, a right to be constantly expressing yourself, to say what's on your mind. We're even taught that you shouldn't hold anything back. That completely contradicts what the Buddha, in a mindful way, we should hold things back because we know that they're either not going to have any good in the world or they're likely going to create more upset, more tension in the world, more stress. We don't have to be expressing a self-referential ego self all the time. In fact, we should learn to practice restraint when that ego self is arising. And Mary brings up such an important point. If we find ourselves in a situation where this self-referential ego self is always arising and contrary to what's occurring in the world, maybe we need to change what we're exposing ourselves to, rather than always coming up against something that is creating tension in ourselves. Another way of saying that is it's okay to remove ourselves from the constant entanglements with the world. Whether it's through global politics and what's occurring in the world, or simply the great distraction of maybe social media, always being attached that way. That's just another way of saying we're always entangled in the world. Maybe even more so to turn the TV and the radio, whatever else we're listening to, off, for a reasonable amount of time, to disconnect from the world in that way. We don't always need to be connected in that manner. I remember when I was growing up, we didn't have cell phones. In fact, we didn't. I still remember when we got a TV. That doesn't mean that I went that far back. Other people had TVs before the hospital got one. But I remember that being brought into the house, and it was an occasion that we actually watched TV. It wasn't on all the time. When I first started in business, we didn't have cell phones. We still had those phones that were plugged into the wall. And the fact that it wasn't always with me gave me a lot of freedom, because I could go about my business during the day. I had a construction business. And at night, I spend an hour or whatever it took on the phone talking to customers and doing what I had to do. Now, because it's so convenient, we're always on our cell phones, aren't we? We can turn it off. We don't have to always be connected.
Again, I go through guilt if I don't respond immediately to a person's email or text. Now it's a text, And
Yep.
Will they get offended if I don't respond to them right away? Well, how short can I be without being?
And some people will.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
And somehow the world progressed before cell phones. And again, I'm not putting a judgment on that. We can use them wisely too. We can stop letting the common things in life be such a distraction to us. It's up to us. Oftentimes we judge ourselves harshly for giving in to desire and then tormenting ourselves over the choice we make. Again, if we find that we're on the phone 16 hours a day, don't judge yourself harshly, just turn it off. Many constantly berate themselves with the misguided belief that a continually harsh view of oneself will somehow lead to improvement. It simply leads to more delusion and often anxiety and depression. And we can think and think ourselves into awful states of awful mental states of being, simply insisting that we're completely broken selves, and then we keep beating ourselves up for that, and it just goes on and on and on. There's no value in it at all. Certainly in the Western world, there is a belief that we can identify all of what is wrong with our personalities ourselves, and that somehow this will lead to resolution to the end of our problems. This is that whole idea of analyzing, where did this quality of mind. I'm certainly not saying that there's no value in therapeutic analysis. There's great benefit in it. I'm talking about within the framework of the Dhamma, and it's important to see that as something different. Within the Eightfold Path, there's no value in analyzing where something comes from. What's important is to recognize that it's present, that I have a less than peaceful mind state. Be at peace with it and learn how to develop in a direct way a peaceful mind state. That way of self-judging is simply another way of attempting to establish a substantial and permanent self. And this aspect of conditioned thinking can only create more stress. And I will continue reinforcing that you are a broken self. There's something wrong with you. What's wrong with all of us is simply a wrong view. And the Buddha describes that as like foam on the ocean. There's really nothing there. Simply recognize that they're wrong views. Abandoning desire leads to freedom from the cause of stress, including the desire to identify what's wrong with us. The reasonable, mindful, and awakened behavior of abandoning desire leads directly to the cessation of suffering. The development of the qualities of mind through the moral, ethical, and concentration practices of the Eightfold Path leads directly to comprehension and abandonment. So that last paragraph really relates to how to approach ourselves in Dhamma practice. We're not bringing a broken self into this practice, trying to fix it. We're bringing this self that is rooted in wrong view solely to recognize that. Recognize that the views that I've created out of false assumptions rooted in ignorance are just that, they're wrong views. Recognize the views. Recognize the ongoing thinking rooted in wrong views, and simply abandon that. Excuse me. That really is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. Does anybody have any question about that? Do you see that clearly, that that's really what we're trying to do? It's such an important point. Again, if we're going into this with the idea that me as an individual, I'm personally a mess. Your practice then has that underlying intention to fix a broken self, rather than, and that creates a substantiality where there is nothing substantial. Meaning I've now created a substantial self that's broken. Simply recognizing that the assumptions, the fabrications that led me to believe that I'm a broken self in need of fixing are rooted in ignorance, leads directly to saying, let me understand ignorance. Let me see where that ignorance came from. Is that clear? So it's really a completely different approach than fixing a broken self. It's simply recognizing that the thoughts that lead to that notion of a broken self are rooted in ignorance. And so how do I overcome that ignorance? That's why the Buddha presented an Eightfold Path. Because a mind that's rooted in ignorance will create very intricate and very powerful strategies that allow it to ignore its own ignorance. It's another way of saying a deluded mind can only continue delusion unless it has a way of recognizing that its own delusion, right? Okay. Within the framework of the Eightfold Path, the practice of Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, putting aside impermanent thoughts as thoughts arise, and settling the mind by being mindful of the breath in the body, allows for the insight into our own stress-originating desires. And through mindfulness of our own thoughts, we are able to abandon desire. We simply are able to recognize the process that we have created in ourselves to continue that story rooted in ignorance. But we need a measure of concentration. We need a way to interrupt one thought immediately following the next thought, one ignorant thought immediately followed by another ignorant thought. We need a way to interrupt that if we're able to recognize ignorance. And that really is the purpose of meditation. Often meditation is described as creating spaciousness in our minds, and it really is. It really feels that way sometimes. We have a little bit of space between one ignorant thought and the next ignorant thought for wisdom to arise in between those thoughts. We need to create that space through another way for that spaciousness is a well-concentrated mind. And then we need a framework to understand when wisdom is arising between those two ignorant thoughts. And that's where the Eightfold Path comes in. And we've all had that experience now, and usually very quickly when we start a meditation practice, of recognizing thoughts that are rooted in wisdom rather than thoughts that are rooted in ignorance, don't we? Every one of us has had that experience. It's important to acknowledge that experience too, because that's the beginning of awakening. It's the beginning of full human maturity, by recognizing the difference. And it is a different way of thinking. The Buddha was the biggest radical of his time, and I would say of all time, because of that one thing. He realized that we could gain control of our thinking, and we could think in a different way that was contrary to the way the whole world was thinking. The reason why we want to do that is look out on the world. Look at the results of the thinking, the common thinking in the world, and what it has developed. What has developed? When the Buddha awakened, he described awakening this way. I looked out on the world, and the world was aflame. Do you think he would say something different if he awakened today in Frenchtown, New Jersey? No, he'd say exactly the same thing. And the solution is exactly the same. And that does not mean that we should feel hopeless. But the Buddha described the First Noble Truth as all-encompassing dukkha, meaning being in the world is an ongoing experience of dukkha, of disappointment, of unsatisfactoriness, all the way up to extreme suffering. What can we do about it? Change the way we think. And then we can be at peace with a less than peaceful mind state, and we can be at peace with a less than peaceful world. Isn't that what we all really want? Aren't all our pursuits at their very root seeking a way to establish peace in our own minds? That's what the Buddha awakened to. That's really what we're after, because we can't immediately change what's occurring in the world, but we can immediately change how we react to that world. Let me continue. From the Kula Sahanata Sutta, the Buddha teaches what is to be abandoned in order to end stress and suffering and to awaken. The Buddha's words. And notice how directly relevant these words are to what's occurring in the world today and in our own minds today. When ignorance is abandoned, meaning comprehending the truth of stress, when ignorance is abandoned and right understanding has arisen, one no longer clings to sensual pleasure, one no longer clings to deluded views, one no longer clings to rules and observances, one no longer clings to a doctrine of self. One is not agitated. One personally attains nibbana, meaning a mind that is resting in equanimity. When ignorance is abandoned, the Buddha put no other qualifications on developing that a mind of lasting peace and happiness. Ignorance must be abandoned. And when it is, peace prevails. And when it is, we no longer react to the events of the world, whether it's another individual person right in our face or someone on the news or an event, because we have abandoned ignorance, meaning we now understand the way things are and that they can't be any different than what's occurring in this moment. The Buddha never saw himself as a savior. He didn't teach a salvific religion. He taught a way for individuals to end their own ignorance and so to develop individually common peaceful minds. Now, imagine if enough people actually did this. Then there could really be a change, a global change, couldn't there? And I'm not saying we should do this or should even expect it. But the only way we can bring that possibility into the world, that potential, is for us to awaken or for us to take to the Dhamma. It's the only way it can work. And so by doing that, we're at least affecting in a meaningful way our local environment, aren't we? Meaning the people we come in contact with, our immediate family. And in that way, perhaps it can have more of a global effect, but it begins with us. It begins with that awakening. I think that's a good place to end the second talk on what it means to awaken. So as far as awakening to the second noble truth, it means understanding and abandoning craving and clinging. Craving for or desire for things to be different than they are. And once we've done that, clinging to that notion that that's what I need to be happy. That's what craving and clinging means. In the independent origination, craving is a requisite condition for clinging, and it's usually presented clinging and maintaining. And clinging and maintaining is a requisite condition for becoming. So in that sixth and seventh link in dependent origination, we see how we're creating a self-identity in the world. And because that self-identity is rooted in ignorance, we're becoming more ignorant. If we can use the eightfold, when we use the eightfold path to interrupt that process, then this moment holds the potential to become awakened and to stop bringing further strife into our own lives. So that's what it means to awaken to the second noble truth, to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. Not necessarily a rhetorical question. If you want to answer, please answer. Do you think that's possible to do that? To recognize and abandon craving and clinging?
Totally.
Oh.
Not personally.
Since we're broadcasting all over the world, let the world know that Lorna is the one that said no. The reason why I say that is, if Tracy often.
Yeah. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Tracy comments often on how helpful Lorna's comments are. I'm sure I'll hear from Tracy later saying that one was, no, I'm just kidding. So why do you say that though, Lorna?
Because I sit and listen to your class and understand it. Get outside these walls and life. I grab onto life.
Yeah.
I grab onto all the wrong things. But I am understanding more and more and more. Every time I come, I understand. Every time we go through this, I understand a little bit more. Yeah. In fact, much. Anyway, I'll say it now, I know, but I was going to say, in preparation for this class, I read down from your website, and there's a link to the 5 clinging aggregates.
Mm-hmm.
And I clicked on that, read down the 5 clinging aggregates again. And I was actually sitting in a car waiting for somebody, so I hadn't anything else to sort of like throw my mind on. So I just sat and contemplated the 5 clinging aggregates. And if you take just one of those, just one, like form, for you really to comprehend throughout your day, form is what Buddha says in a more scientific description, that it's just changing. It's just at this present time it's like this, but it's changing and constantly changing, and it's going to decay and drop off and die and whatever. Just even to hold that one thing in your mind for a day is exhausting. I mean, and then there's another 4 of them. To really to comprehend and to change your thinking that you don't believe in form, you don't believe it, that it's going to, that, well, you do believe that it's on a changing process. For you to hold that one thing in mind for a day is exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I get it, but practicing it, doing it, realizing it, believing it, and not get caught up in life is extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
And what you just said, do you think I can do it? Really? I don't think so. I need a ball from I have no something to come and
Oh, you're not going to get that.
knock me on the head or something to get this to really for me to change.
Just let go.
So thank you for saying that. And your honesty. It can seem, and often seems like it's overwhelming and it's a nearly impossible task. Taking refuge means understanding that a human being did this. It's achievable, and he taught us a way to do it. So it can seem extremely tiresome if we are about it. But in moments as life occurs, when we find that we are becoming agitated in some way, that might mean elation too, it doesn't mean necessarily aversion, to simply remind ourselves that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am, relating to form as a permanent self. That who I am in this moment, sitting in this car, remembering the five clinging aggregates, is simply what's occurring, and not to create any more significance than even that. And that's really the hard, subtle part of this, to not overemphasize even the Dhamma in this moment, to simply realize this is what's occurring, and this is what's occurring in my mind in this moment. There's almost a paradox in that we need to be mindful of the Eightfold Path 24/7, each moment that are, but there's also a gentleness about that allows us to, when we find that we're not completely mindful, completely framed by the Eightfold Path, to be at peace with that. Because that can lead to feelings like, this is overwhelming, it's too hard to do, it's tiresome. Simply come back to what's occurring. But it's such an important thing that you brought up. I'm sorry, Becky, for making you wait.
That's okay. I also feel, Lorna, that maybe it's not that you have to have all of these precepts in the front of your mind all the time so that you react and respond correctly at every moment. The idea is that you think about them and you meditate, and you gradually, your mind will incorporate this, and it will be something that's in the back of your mind, and your mind will eventually automatically respond correctly. I don't try to look at it as, oh, I have to know what every clinging aggregate is, and I have to know what all the, right speech is, and I have to understand that. I can't even say them because I just sort of think of it as a practice where eventually it will sort of click in a way that you didn't realize if you continue to develop a focused, concentrated mind. So
Thank you.
I agree with that.
I did acting when I was younger, and whenever I would do a role, that is what would happen to me. I would learn all these lines, and I would learn all this blocking, and I would learn all of this stuff that I had to know in order to do this, technically know in order to do it. But then I had to go into sort of I don't know, I would have to figure out one thing that brought that whole character together to concentrate on. And that's the only thing I could concentrate on. And then everything else would come out right. And that's what I feel like I'm trying to do here. Like I'm trying to learn all of the techniques of what it is, how it works, But this is like way harder than playing any role ever. I mean, this is going to take a long time and a lot of work. But I still think the idea is not to focus so hard on each individual aspect. I'd rather.
Thank you.
Okay,
Well,
talking.
No. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It does. It takes time. It takes practice. We first, and again, that's why the Eightfold Path is there, to frame that practice, because it's too easy. It would be too easy for a distracted mind to fall outside of the framework of the Eightfold Path and lose focus, lose all aspects of it. Well, I think what Lorna is describing is, having developed the Eightfold Path, you're realizing the implications of what's occurring moment by moment. And at that point, it can seem overwhelming and almost unachievable. But we remind ourselves that this is something that a human being, Siddhartha Gautama, developed. In other words, he was extraordinary in many ways, but he wasn't extraordinary, meaning it's not beyond us to do just this. Or else he wouldn't even have taught it. He said repeatedly, if this wasn't achievable for everyone, then I wouldn't teach it. He didn't diminish himself. He never elevated himself to the point where I can do it and you can try, but good luck. It was, I am the same as you. He never made a distinction between himself as an awakened human being and what other human beings could achieve. But it does take practice. It's not just something we can hope for. And again, that you sitting in the car shows a deep level of understanding simply by understanding how much further there is to go. You know where you are, which is so important in this practice. Deb.
Well, I was kind of having the same reaction and responded the same as Lauren in the sense that, a couple of times you said something about, abandoning ignorance or just letting go. And that's my response too is that just feels pretty impossible. And I think of how the Buddha and some of his other monks kind of just got it so quickly, I mean, you're saying they're human and they are, and it feels like they are extraordinary because of the fact that they got it. I mean, then 45 years, he didn't take him 45 years to get it, he got it, and then for 45 years he taught it.
Yeah.
So to me, that's pretty extraordinary based on my own, I mean, I think of you, Lauren, like you're like reading it a lot more and doing a lot more than I am, just in terms of dealing with life. Just finding the time between, everything has to read and think about it. And it does feel like that it's great that there's people that can maybe find enlightenment. But I feel like I'm just going to discourage myself if I try to think I'll find that, like in this lifetime, because it's like such an inching along. And the other piece I wanted to say earlier was about the monkey mind is that, and this is connected for me, is that I think there's different levels of monkey mind, and I think it's about people's chemistry. And I think that there's, it's harder for some people just because of the chemistry that they have. Like it isn't a monkey mind that's just about getting off track. It's that some people have very tangential minds, and it is getting off track, but it's not just, I forget how you said it, but you just get lost in these thoughts. Oh, I know, it's not necessarily about craving and clinging. The thoughts are just rapid and flowing, and it isn't even about wanting something a lot of times, just that your mind is off on a tangent.
Oh yeah. Thank you for all. Did I interrupt you?
No.
That's entirely true. And even that mind that is prone to thinking that way can use the breath to deepen concentration. And so our brains are organically different, individually organically different from other people, depending on, a lot of it has to do with our experience. And medical studies have shown that meditation alone can recreate the connections that deepen concentration. So again, which is, if you take that idea a little bit further, you realize that a conditioned mind has organically changed the way the brain works to support conditioned thinking. And because that's occurred, in other words, our brains just don't form. Our environment and our life impacts the way that our brain is, the organic structure of our brain. So conditioning thinking has altered the brain in such a way that it now supports conditioning thinking. As we deepen, this is just a practical application of the Dhamma, it affects that conditioned aspect of our brain to decondition the organic structure of our brain. And so we get to the point where our brain is organically different. I mean, they've proven that. So it's not easy. I mean, but that is part of developing awakening. It's reflected in our entire being. Our brain is as impermanent as everything else.
I understand that neurobiology piece, but I just think it's a whole lot harder for some people.
Oh yeah, I don't mean to imply that this is simple and easy for everyone and that everyone should get it or would get it immediately. Yeah, I've been teaching long enough to realize that some people do get it quicker than others. A lot of people during the Buddhist time got it pretty quickly, but some took much longer, even though they heard every teaching the Buddha ever gave. His cousin Ananda always comes to mind when I think about that. He heard every teaching he heard most of the teachings of the first 20 years of the Buddhist teachings. And then for the last 25 years, he was there for every single talk. And yet, and listening to it and having a strong desire to awaken. And yet Ananda did not awaken until a month after the Buddha's passing. And the only reason I say that is that the timing isn't important. What is most important is that we engage in right effort and continue and do the best you can. Like you said, Debbie, some of us can put more time into reading and thinking about it and practicing than others. That's just the way it is in the world. We do the best we can and keep ourselves focused. But anybody can awaken in this lifetime. I mean, it's possible. Each moment holds the potential to incline our minds towards awakening. So, boy, great. Yes,
You
one.
just sort of gave me hope that, I mean, you were just outlining that I have learned to think of life the wrong way. I have learned that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's wrong view. Yep.
So that opens the possibility that I can also learn the right way. Just
that's well said. That better than I can say it. So thank you. Jen, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you too. I think in response to your question, well, two things, and that the second one kind of relates to something that I've just experienced. So abandoning, craving, and clinging happens in a moment. You could be having an argument with somebody and choose to stay quiet. You're abandoning, clinging to being right in that moment. So I think if you're practicing this, you may be experiencing abandoning, craving, and clinging
Directly.
in a subtle way that you don't even recognize or that you're taking for granted. So that's the first piece. The second thing is, there are bigger parts of your conditioning that you recognize as craving and clinging. That's a habit or behavior.
Yeah.
And I think in that regard, the abandoning or the recognizing can come decades before the abandoning.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's right.
And in my experience, I just recently had, I started going to see Matt like 4 or 5 years ago now. And the original reason I went to him was because I knew that I had a weird, and I didn't even know that it was craving and clinging, but now I would call it a behavior with regard to food that was not serving me. I was overeating when I was stressed, emotionally eating. I had been in therapy for it. I just couldn't let that behavior go. And in the 4 years that I've been working with him and here, I've been continuing with that behavior and seeing it and recognizing it and knowing that I'm doing it and doing it anyway, and just kind of trying to be gentle and using a practice, but not stopping. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had a gallbladder attack, which is really painful. Mm. And I mean, an hour into it, before I eventually went to the emergency room, but an hour into it, it was like a light bulb went off. Well, I was just like, you can't do that anymore. You just can't do it anymore. And that's it. And I am okay with that. It's done. Yeah. Like, I feel like I mean, who knows, it might come back. But I feel like I have abandoned that behavior, and I am totally at peace with it. And I recognize that it was hurting me, and I've let it go. And even though I've seen a healthcare professional since then, including Matt, who's taking care of me, in my opinion, so I'm going to stay with him, who have, told me that I need to get back to doing what I was doing before. Like, they need to get me back to being able to eat normally, eat what I want. And they want to take my gallbladder out. They're telling me I don't need to change my diet. I don't need to lose weight. I'm fine. Just get your gallbladder out, And so that brings me to the third point, which is it's just so important to have Sangha members that are there to support your recognizing and abandoning craving and clinging, because you're in a world where there's authority figures, there's professionals who are saying, continue to crave and cling.
Yeah.
You need to continue to do what you were doing before, so you can be exactly the same, even though I'm going to remove an organ, so you can do that.
All we have to do is remove an organ.
Don't worry about it. You don't need it.
So,
that's what they told me about my uterus. Get it out. You don't need it.
You're describing.
This is as a solution for your gallbladder attacks. That's all they're looking
Yeah,
at.
right.
And that's what they're trained to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that will get rid of that problem.
Right, and that's
You'll never have a gallbladder
that's
attack
what I
again.
kept thinking of when they were talking to me. I was like, wow, you're not seeing the whole picture, and I can't listen to your advice. But that's a tough, that's not easy if you have an ego, because your ego's like, no, you ought to be exactly the same, so it's just important to have a Sangha.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for it. The world is dukkha.
Right.
The world is very supportive of ignoring ignorance. I had the same thing about a year ago. A gallbladder, it's brutal. Mm-hmm. And first person I called was Matt. I still got a gallbladder. So the first thing you were describing, that a conditioned mind habituates us towards reacting in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And every time we practice restraint, we're deconditioning that habit. And that's exactly how it works. Usually step by step by step. Usually it's not instantaneous. But every time we do it, we're deconditioning our conditioned mind. And we're changing the organic structure of our brains too, where to eventually it gets to the point where we no longer react. And that the broader understanding of conditioned thinking, or maybe the more obvious or immediate, maybe even overwhelming aspects of a conditioned mind and how it drives us, it often takes time.
Right.
From recognition to
Right.
final renunciation.
Yeah.
So it isn't necessarily, in fact, it's often not instantaneous. Just like the subtle things that we habituate ourselves to and continue that reaction, the bigger things usually take a little bit longer time. And during that time, let's just say it's 4 years, from the immediate recognition of the problem to the eventual renunciation of the problem, there was a graduation of your understanding of the problem until finally it felt like, aha. But it really was a developing understanding of the problem.
I don't think I would have been, there's no way I would have recognized it if I hadn't been involved in the practice. There's just no way I would have made the connection of eating ridiculously, absurdly. I would not have made the connection that between eating and a problem with a digestive organ.
Yeah.
I never would have made that connection, but you know.
And that's exactly the nature of a mind rooted in ignorance.
Right.
It ignores
Yeah.
the direct problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it takes a while to unravel it. So I'm so glad you did. Thank you for sharing that today. Becky, good to see you again.
Oh, it's so good to be back. Thank you. Well, I feel like life has really distracted me over the last month, but coming here and sitting down again, I felt like I was back home.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
So I'm not really, I don't really have a lot to say. I'm working to get, I'm going to, you know, try to get back to my meditating. We were away for almost 3 weeks and I didn't do any meditating while I was gone. So I just feel like this was such a nice return. And I just want to recount one very quickly story about letting go of something. Like Jen said, when she was able to let go of the idea that she can't eat like that anymore, and she's fine with it, and it's like it's gone. When I first started this practice, I had a lot of dukkha coming from my family who are out west. And I was trying to work through with that. And one day I was meditating and my mind was still thinking, okay, now what can I do to keep my brother from borrowing all that money from my father? And my father doesn't know he's taking it. Should I tell my father? And I was meditating and all of a sudden it was like, this is not my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to fix my family who's broken and had been broken forever. It's not my responsibility. Yeah. And I actually burst into tears while I'm sitting in my little meditating place at home. And since that moment, I have been able to just abandon that. When stuff comes up now, I normally would have said, well, why don't you let me call so-and-so and I can do this and I can set up this so you can do that. But I just say, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Please let me know if there's anything I can do.
And peace prevails in your mind.
And they don't even, it doesn't make any bit of difference to them whatsoever. I just like, wow, man.
So true.
Oh, and so that's why I know what happened to her. It's possible that it's not going to come back, that you really have let it go and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Becky. That, again, it's such a practical example of the Dhamma and integrating it into our lives.
It is.
It's we don't need to take any of those things personally. And the world goes on without my input.
Exactly.
It just does. Thank you. Eva, good to see you.
It's wonderful to be here. A great class and great talk, and good to hear everyone. I was sitting in my car driving home in Jersey City traffic in the evening, and I was slinging arrow after arrow after arrow because of dealing with an obnoxious person prior to leaving Jersey City. And I realized how dangerous that was because I was not aware of the traffic that was going on around me and how I was driving with like, okay, this arrow and that arrow. And I was driving a bit dangerously because I really wasn't, because I was so angry at myself because I was not being gentle with myself because I was not able to deal with that situation. And I had to go and say something, which luckily the other person had the grace to, or whatever, to not continue it. But I felt that I should have been the one. I'm the one that goes to meditation. I'm the one that. Anyway, so I was just like, it was just bad. But it was just the realization that in that car, I was continuing to hurt myself, perpetuating the feeling of the situation so that I could continue it next time I go there, or next time I drive back, prepare before I get there. And it was just like, okay, I gotta let it go because it really wasn't worth it sitting in that car among everything else that was going on. It was like, what was the point of it? And I hope that I can say that I've let it go, but I don't know. I don't know. It was satisfying at that particular moment to go ahead and say it. And then, okay, so I got to deal with the arrows afterwards. But I realized that it was not, that I should have known better, that it didn't help the matter, that it was just that instant ego that I had to, I couldn't let it go. And I hope that eventually I will wisen up.
Thank you. You did, though. Eventually you realized it. You realized what was occurring, and at that point you practice restraint. And I've said that often, that at any point we can stop the progression of reaction, one reaction leading to the next, to the next, to the next, and then justifying it and blaming. You cut it off. You recognize the unskillfulness of that. That's how we develop the Dhamma. That's how we eventually get to the point where we don't react at all. But we have to begin somewhere. Really, it's so important that you're able to do that and frame it within the Eightfold Path. So good for you. Mary, good to see you this morning. How are you?
Good to be here. Enjoy this immensely. I get so much out of the discussions, and it helps me to recognize that when my mind is settled, it's because I am not craving and clinging, that I am simply living.
Yeah.
And and it's I'm glad. I'm just glad in that I recognize that, and that's a step forward.
It's a huge step forward. I mean, that's really the essence of it too. So, thank you. Debbie, good to see you this morning.
Good to be here, and I think I already talked enough. And so thanks for today.
Glad you're here. Lorna, good morning.
Good morning. I'd be very brief in saying that I was doing a project which I really enjoyed Monday through the week, and I felt that I was really focused on the project, and my mind was not scattered. I was just enjoying doing the project, and it was just very, very enjoyable. But the project wasn't finished in that day. It followed on a little bit from the following day. And so in the evening of the first day, I found myself thinking about what I'm going to do with the same project tomorrow. And I thought, shucks, I should stop this. Because if I think about it today, I will stop the enjoyment of doing it tomorrow. Because tomorrow, when I'm doing the project, I'll be following my own thoughts and my own instructions, and not just enjoy doing it at the time. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So and that's the first time I've thought if I stop thinking now, I'm benefiting myself, and because I'm going to enjoy doing it tomorrow, because I'm not just following out my own instructions. I'll be just doing it at the time, which I enjoyed doing during that day, the first day, and I knew I could do it the second day if I just stopped thinking about it. So I stopped thinking about it. There you go. That's my story of the week.
That's outstanding. You have gained the ability, from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, you've gained the ability to think what you want to think when you want to think it. It's remarkable. It really is. We can, most of us are likely going to live a few more minutes or a few more days or a few more weeks. So it's reasonable to consider the future, but it's unreasonable to arrange the future now.
Yes.
And that's the big difference.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Did you do what you were thinking you were going to do the night before, or did you do something different?
Did I?
The night, did you wind up doing what you were thinking about doing, or on the project on the second day, or did you do something totally different?
I stopped thinking about it.
You just stopped thinking about it, so you didn't even develop
I stopped thinking about it on the understanding that I would have the joy the next day of doing it.
Right.
Providing I stopped thinking about it on the first evening.
See, because I do that all the time. I stop
so
thinking
clever.
about it. No. When I stop, I don't do it for the reason you said. I do it because I feel like I'm it's sort of the same thing. I feel like I'm predetermining
Yes.
what the day is going to look like.
Yes.
And then I'm getting attached to
Yes.
And as a
how
contact that
that's
doesn't
going to
come out.
be, and then also maybe I won't want to make tomato sauce tomorrow.
That's
Maybe
exactly.
I don't want to,
We're in agreement. That's what
you know,
I'm relaying. Yes. Yes.
And that's an aspect of a self-referential ego self, rooted in a conditioned mind, always needing to establish itself, even in imaginary ways, about the next moment, the next day. Always. That's when the Buddha talks about now here and now there, meaning establishing itself. That's what he's referring to. Our minds are always churning out a way of these strategies to continue to establish itself, which is really just foolish to do it in that way, isn't it? So what a great discussion. Yes, please.
I've never done this before, but can I suggest to you sometime that we look at, you used to come out with some phrases about why it's just such a waste of time thinking about the past, why it's such a waste of time thinking about the future, that it never works out like you think it's going to be, so it really is just a waste of time. And you used to incorporate that sort of thing in your classes, and you haven't visited that aspect of thinking for a while. I haven't heard you refer to that. Just all that stuff to think about the past.
Well, yeah, I guess how the past.
No, you've got some phrases that you used to use.
Yeah, I'll never remember them. Those are, they just kind of come up. I'll have to listen to. Well, yes, I know.
I know all of this is referring to your thoughts. I know all of that, but you used to come up with some phrases like, it's a waste of time because, thinking about the past, and a waste of time thinking about the future because. So
I'm going to I'll give some talks on impermanence, and we'll see what comes out. Thank you for the suggestion. And I meant to kind of ask that if any of you in any of the classes have something specific that you'd like me to talk about, just let me know, and I will. Well, if it's Dhamma related. If it's politics, I won't. At least I'll try not to. Good to see you, Debbie.
Bye.
So we will finish with the Karaniya Metta Sutta. Just a reminder, the Dana dinner is coming up November 21st, Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. Please come. So find your relaxed meditative posture. And gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk today. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.